This is the Protestant Libertarian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I really hope that you guys enjoy today's show. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. My guest today is Brent M. He hosts the Aiming Up podcast, where he explores everything from libertarian and politics to health, religion, psychedelics, and actually like just a ton of different stuff on the show. You really can't pin what you do on your show down there, and you have a lot of incredible guests on there. You were kind enough to invite me on your show last week, and so I'm having Brent on just to talk about his background, how he got to where he is today, and just some of his thoughts on things that are going on in the world. Brent, really excited to have you on today.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. We had such a great catch up last time. I'm really happy to be on your show.
Yeah, and man, you have a really interesting backstory, and that's why I'm excited to talk to you about it today. But before we do that, just kind of introduce yourself to my audience, what you do with the podcast, and everything else about you.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, my name is Brent. I work in the tech industry. I've been in there about 30 years. I'm in one of the largest tech companies in the whole world right now, and been recently getting into podcasting. So I've been running Aiming Up podcasts for about a year now. Got episode like 76 under our belt right now. So really trying to churn out a bunch of content. Had a bunch of great libertarian guests like yourself and Bob Murphy, Jacob Wennergrad, like all the way up and down the list, man. I've had a bunch of libertarian thinkers on. And so that's a core, topic that I cover. Now, some people say it's too much, but also health and fitness. And like you said, psychedelics, religion, politics, cosmology, physics, whatever it is. Like I'm an ADD person, whatever I'm interested in, dude.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my goal with this show as well, too. It's the Protestant Libertarian Podcast, which is so broad that it can accompany us, like just a ton of different things that I'm interested in. And I know sometimes I do episodes that are just purely because I'm interested in it. And I know that maybe the people in my audience might not always be excited about it. But when you have kind of just an interest in learning about how the world works, that kind of stuff happens. And I got to ask you, man, when I was on your show last week, we talked about so many different issues, and it was really cool. And you kind of gave me some just like quick snapshots into your life, but I didn't get the full story. So talk to me about like how you became a libertarian in the first place. Like, how did you discover this philosophy?
That's a difficult question. I would say it's mainly through philosophy. I was always sort of into politics peripherally, but it wasn't anything that I really paid a ton of attention to. I grew up really poor, and I went to a Catholic school. My family's super, super Catholic. And I got like reduced tuition for, cleaning the trash bins after school and stuff. But, and I kind of was jealous of a lot of the kids in that school because all their parents were like attorneys and doctors and these rich, preppy kids. And they all seemed to be Republicans. So at the time I was kind of like, maybe I should be like those people. And so I kind of got sucked into that. Like, this is like the Ronald Reagan era. That was really big. And he was very popular, pretty broadly at the time, honestly. Reagan was a very popular president at the time. And so I thought I was Republican for a while. And then I started to get into philosophy. Right. So that's really a topic that I cover a lot on my show. You get into philosophy circles, and then you start to go down the rabbit hole of moral philosophy. You end up in ethics. And I found the non-aggression principle. And so that's kind of the gateway drug into that realm. And then like everybody else, like Ron Paul was sort of my gateway drug on the political side. And so I kind of went those two avenues, they sort of intersected. And I've been sort of in the space for decades and decades now. It's been a long time.
So was philosophy something that you studied in school, or something that you just happened to stumble across on your
Just
own?
had an interest in, man. Like I mentioned, I had to go stay after school cleaning blackboards and dumping trash cans at the school. And I used to hang out in the library a lot, waiting for my mom to finish work. And so I would just, before the internet, man, that was my internet. So I would just pull books off the shelf at random, and I would pick up various things, and got into Aristotle and Plato and the old, Socrates, the Greek philosophers. And from there, it just sort of spiraled. I got really interested in it. I had a cousin who ended up taking a PhD, or he got a PhD in philosophy. And so I'm not exactly sure how I ended up down that rabbit hole, man, but it was just one of those areas of interest that, it grabbed me. I don't know. I think there's certain things that grab people, right? Like it's almost like you don't pick it, it kind of picks you. And for me, that's kind of the way I feel about, moral philosophy and libertarianism.
Yeah, and man, I mean, it is really interesting with philosophy, and it's something that we kind of touched on when I discussed when I talked to you a little bit about just like education on the show last week, where I went through public school for 12 years and was never introduced to any serious philosophical ideas, and it wasn't really until like my second year in college where I had my Paul professor in Bible college recommended that I read Michel Foucault because of some
Mm.
of the work that he was doing on that, and I read him, and that was like, oh man, there's this entire branch of knowledge that I know nothing about. And it really does, I think, for people that try to think critically about the world, it really can suck you in because it does I think it reframes the way that we think about the world around us. And I think it's really incredible when people like you are able to discover that from a young age. Like, did you ever use it against your teachers in high school?
Not really. I didn't do good in high school. Like it took me an extra year to graduate. My report card was like AAFFAF. Like if I was interested in it, I did great at it. If I wasn't
Yeah.
interested in it, you couldn't get me to do the schoolwork. And so no, it was really a personal thing that I sort of was just like, so it was, I gravitated towards it. And when, once you start going into the philosophy circles, you start out and you think you have everything nailed down. And then all of a sudden you realize like, oh, that's just the elementary version. This thing goes way, way down, and so that's why it was so appealing to me because it's something that there's a lot of hard problems in philosophy, and it's a very rigorous subject. It's difficult to get nailed down, particularly in the area of ethics, particularly in the area of religious philosophy. And so it seemed like an endless supply of stimulation, which my brain just needs. I need my brain needs to scratch every once in a while, and philosophy seems to do it. And so I really enjoy it, and it's just something that I just can't really get enough of. It's a lot of fun.
So were you kind of like a dissident when you were younger? Have you always had sort of like dissonant views? Were you like, because I know like for me, like I just remember being in high school and always thinking like, I don't know why these adults are telling me this because none of it sounds like it's true. I just kind of had like a natural skepticism towards authority. Were you like that, or was that something that developed over time?
It developed over time. I was actually kind of naive, and I think it's what philosophy cured in me because I was raised, like I said, very religious, very Catholic, and I didn't question any of it. It was like, oh, the guy rings the bell, and then magic happens, and then now this wafer is actually literally becomes Jesus, and like all this crazy stuff they used to teach. Sorry if that's offensive, Catholics, but I unquestioningly swallowed it, and I got a lot of that in public school too. I would just accept a whole bunch of stuff. And philosophy, like I said, it's really the thing that pulled me out of it. That's a framework for critical thinking. And if you haven't, done that, you haven't laid that foundation, I think that really lets you be pulled along by the currents of society and culture and politics and school and education and propaganda. Like it's very difficult otherwise, unless you've got a really good grounding in moral philosophy and ethical philosophy and just even standard epistemology, right? Like if you don't have epistemology, metaphysics at the bottom, like what are you going to build on? It's actually very difficult to get a coherent worldview.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the reasons why people are so self-assured in what they know is that they've never thought about the way that human knowledge actually works and about how that helps us to kind of mediate the world around us. And I think that there are so many problems that are bound up with that if you never reflect on them, it can almost create this kind of hubris. Well, the way that I view the world has to be the way that it actually is, and everyone who disagrees with me is automatically wrong. And I see that in a lot of people that haven't really seriously considered exactly what you were talking about, that all of these questions down to the fundamentals of how we know the world around us, it just completely shapes the way that you understand life.
Yeah, it does. And once you start overlaying various disciplines on top of it, they're really subdomains, like things like science, right? So I'm very interested in science, and particularly neuroscience and how our cognitive apparatus functions. Science is a subset of philosophy, and it's really, really important to have that, sort of these different layers of analysis, right? So, like you mentioned, knowledge production, right? Like what's true, like what's actually true in the real world. We have to understand something that number one, our senses, our sense data is the only way that we have to know anything about objective reality, and we essentially hallucinate our experience. Like this is not, our experience, our, the qualitative experience of our existence is not actual reality. This is just what our little evolved meat machines have, our best approximation to make sense and let us navigate through the universe, and hopefully successfully reproduce. And it's not actual reality. And I think most people don't ever actually think about it that deeply, or look into like determinism, like how much of what we are is actually deterministic and how much of it's probabilistic, like how much, what would be called libertarian free will do we have, if any? Like these are really deep questions and they're difficult questions. And I think everybody who's a serious thinker should, number one, have that philosophical grounding, ask themselves some very difficult questions, and also be not really sure about the outcomes, like your beliefs. The biggest red flag for me is somebody who is absolutely certain in their beliefs. That for me is like, whoa, you have really misunderstood the gravity of the situation and the great difficulty that we have at arriving at any solid conclusions, frankly.
Yeah. What do you think about the postmodernists?
Well, the postmodernists, I know you mentioned Foucault earlier. They raise really good questions, right? A lot of people on the right and in the libertarian circles oftentimes just hand wave the postmodernists away and say like, "Oh, you guys are insane." And I think there's a reason for that, because if you take postmodernism, too far, you can get into those places where it is dangerous. It ends up in very bad places. But ultimately, their skepticism of grand narratives, like that's real. That's true. That's a good thing that came out of postmodernism. But I think particularly get into like Derrida, right? You start getting into some areas of postmodernism where you want to blur all these boundaries. You want to, like, you talk about queer theory, right? Are you familiar with the concept of queer theory and the using queer as a verb, actually, to queer something? That's extraordinarily dangerous, man. I think that's what we've been seeing, is sort of this manifestation in our culture of postmodernism taken way too far. And we now have no categories, we have no boundaries. And I think that's what's driving a lot of the trans movement, is this intentional desire that sort of incubated in the institutions like, universities, and it sort of made its way out into the world, to where we want to blur every single boundary, and having some boundaries is healthy. But the postmodernists could accurately point out, like, well, where exactly is the boundary? Can you point out? It's like, well, no, actually, it's actually very difficult. And they play that trick on people that are sophisticated. But ultimately, I think the outcome of it is pretty detrimental. I honestly do. I don't think postmodernism has had a great impact on society.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's where I feel like the works of some of the earlier postmodernists like Jean-Francois Lyotard and Michel Foucault are qualitatively different than the works of later postmodernists. Some of that is that I think that not everyone that claims the mantle of postmodernism actually understands what some of the core tenets of that philosophy are. What was really appealing to me about Foucault's work in particular is kind of going back to what you said. It's the kind of the infinite subjectivity of the human mind, that all ideas are kind of like a product of a particular cultural and historical context. And unless we understand that, then we can't really grasp just how tenuous of a comprehension we have of our reality. And I liked how, and I think in a lot of ways, what Foucault did in some of his work was fairly libertarian, because one of the things that he was known for was kind of going back to that Nietzschean stream of philosophy and saying that, look, a lot of what we understand to be truth is really just something that was imposed upon us by people that want to exercise power over others. And I think that there's a lot to that. And I look at the work of someone like Thomas Szasz, who I'm sure you're familiar with him, libertarian psychologist who's done a lot of work in that vein. And he's able to take a lot of those insights and I think work them in a direction that doesn't say, well, there is no such thing as truth. It's just our ability to understand it is really, really difficult. And we have to be careful with how we employ those kinds of terms. And so I'm with you on that. And that's one of the things where, like, I do think that there's a distinction between like the modern critical theorists who have taken over the political conversation in the United States and kind of like the classic mid-century postmodern. And the critical theorists are actually very dangerous.
Yeah, totally, because they end up in a territory that makes certain claims, right? Like, I get the postmodernist claim that it's very difficult and squishy to sort of identify what is actually true. We're not great at it. We're imperfect. But their claim is sort of like, you can know nothing about objective reality. That's where their claims end up, right? And that's the secondary claim is that, human beings, like interactions between humans, are nothing but power dynamics, right? There's an oppressor class and there's an oppressed class, and this is where you get into, the oppression Olympics, like we talked about with intersectionality, like how do we slice and dice this up to determine who? And it really ends up being power dynamics, and I think that's extraordinarily dangerous because it reduces a person's individuality to nil. You're only sort of an amalgamation of what groups, it's sort of like arbitrary group membership and how those things intersect together from a power dynamic standpoint. I think it's really insulting, particularly for somebody who cares deeply about individual liberty and thinks that the individual is supreme ultimately.
So where do you think this became such a prominent feature of American politics? Like, my own theory on this is that it probably came from the Obama administration, because I feel like they realized that they could use race as a wedge issue to win elections. Do you think that there's something to that? Or do you think that maybe the influence of like critical theory on American politics is deeper than that? Where do you see that kind of impacting how we think about politics today?
I think maybe from a political strategy standpoint, and by the way, I'm terrible at politics. I don't really follow it that much. I'm kind of like I said, I view things through sort of an ethical lens, and so politics is kind of gross to me. I don't pay attention that much to political strategy, so maybe there's something to that. I do know that it is a Marxist tactic to deploy race to sort of divide people. So maybe there's something to that. But I ultimately think that the history goes further back in academia. It has definitely gotten into the institutions. You've seen, I've had Helen Pluckrose on my show, and she talks about it a lot. How it sort of infected the institutions and the universities, and it's been a slow sort of moving thing, I think, until I think where it really took off was around the George Floyd thing, right? We were, the COVID was happening, and then that like match in the tinderbox exploded the whole world. Yeah. And that's where we really saw critical theory sort of jump out into the forefront. It literally overnight, somebody who had never even heard of critical theory, all of a sudden, it was right there. It was in there. We had these corporate DEI trainings. It was all in the news. It was all at once. And so it felt like it had been building up to that. And that was just that moment where everything converged and it just sort of jumped out. It's sort of kind of like I hate to do like a lab leak, it jumped out of the institutions, and it was into all of the corporate environments. It was in all the educational institutions from K-12 all the way up to the universities. It was just everywhere at once. Which is, BlackRock was really pushing this. Like BlackRock and Vanguard. I know because I'm in one of those giant corporations, and it happened to all of them at the same time. And so it's weird. I don't know how much of this was sort of contrived and sort of planned, but I don't know if they had a plan and we're just waiting for like a social moment. But boy, it happened so rapidly. Really from 2014, you started to see it bubbling up, but honestly, like 2020, it just exploded like almost overnight, and all the the media outlets were saying the same thing in unison, and all the corporate trainings were saying the same thing. It was right. It did not feel organic to me in the slightest.
Do you think that the Trump administration has actually put maybe not a stop, but do you think that they've actually kind of hampered the spread of that ideology? Do you think that it's just taking a pause for the first couple of months of his administration?
I honestly don't know. And this is what scares me about the Trump administration, is that these things tend to come in cycles. There's pendulums, and you saw the woke pendulum. It went really hard one way, and now there's momentum to pull it the other way. But what I do know is it never stops in the middle. Right, it feels like it's an never-ending escalation, and so one group does this, and then we got to go now. And I feel like we're just climbing that ladder. I think the intensity is just getting ramped up, and there's public support now because people are sick of the woke shit. But ultimately, I think it's going to swing back the other way. They're just regrouping. I think they're going to have to figure out a way. And frankly, it's like it might take a while, because if you notice, the Democrats have been very quiet since the election. They realized that was a complete repudiation of all of this stuff. And but I do know this stuff doesn't just go away. The people that are behind the scenes that are pushing this stuff, they have the same desires as they had before. They just need to figure out a way to rebrand it, because most of it's PR.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Well, I kind of want to go back to your journey towards libertarianism here for a minute. So you found the non-aggression principle through your study of philosophy. Did you come in contact with libertarian theorists before being exposed to Ron Paul, or was it Ron Paul exposing you to some of these theorists and then you kind of seeing how that intersected with the philosophy that you had been reading beforehand?
No, it was really through the philosophy generally, right? So I had the understanding of it, and I'd gone down the road of the moral philosophy. I'd looked into utilitarianism and all these other aspects when you look at moral philosophy, and it was one of those things where I said it wasn't very political. I kind of was leaning Republican, but then when Ron Paul came out, it wasn't like his '08 campaign. It was way before that. It was kind of like the thing for me that crystallized it was the George Bush administration. The 9/11 thing happened, and that was all very, very prominent. And Ron Paul was the only person that was sort of, saying like, no, we shouldn't be doing this. This is a bad idea. And at that time, I kind of started paying attention. That's where my political thing sort of started tuning in, because before I didn't really care that much. It was just like, whatever. I just kind of, didn't bother. But after 9/11, it was kind of difficult to disregard politics. It was everywhere. It was in your face. If you're at the airport, it was on CNN all the time. Right. And seeing him sort of stand up and say things that resonated with me from an ethical standpoint, and also being, I always had this like soft spot in my heart for the underdog, like the person that is saying the thing in the room, and everyone, like that meme where it's like, yes, you are all wrong, like that. I've always had a soft spot for that guy, and so that really alerted me to him, right? And I'm like, oh, this guy is saying the same stuff that I'm saying, and also aligns with the non-aggression principle. The thing he's putting forward, he talked a lot about the non-aggression principle, and it aligned with my sort of view of moral philosophy. We kind of, ended up in the same place. And I just saw that guy. I was like, oh, he's saying stuff that I'm sort of vibing with. And so I started paying attention to him. I was, the internet was wasn't coming out. Like, I sound like I'm a million years old, but like YouTube was really starting to become prominent. And there was a lot of content for the first time. Before that, it was, do you guys remember like GeoCities websites? And like the internet was kind of shitty back in the day. MySpace, like, it had just kind of at the same time, after 9/11 really took off. The content was being created. There was actually libertarians in the space. I started watching Stefan Molyneux, if you know who that is. Yeah. And he was both for me. Like that dude was great because he was, big into philosophy, and he was also a big libertarian dude. And so all this kind of happened around the same time, and I don't have the exact dates lined up, but I just remember that mishmash of time where it just all came together for me. And I started paying attention a little bit to the political side. Not so much the Libertarian Party. They always kind of seemed like a joke to me. But just, watching Ron Paul was kind of fascinating. And then seeing him in the '08 campaign, really getting some support, and a lot of people that really were sick of that two-party duopoly. And he seemed to really offer a meaningful choice for the first time ever, because it just, before then, like I said, politics just seemed dumb. Like people just kept swapping out people every 4 years and nothing ever changed. I kind of was cynical about it. I kind of got excited about his '08 campaign. I was supportive. I was kind of like rah, Ron Paul at the time. And so, yeah, that's, I don't have a very satisfying answer for you, but it just kind of all just merged at once. I don't know, that probably '03 for me, that really kind of crystallized like my interest in libertarianism, like as, in the political sphere.
So of the libertarian philosophers, who would you say are the ones that have had the greatest influence on you, and which of their works would you recommend to someone?
Rothbard is a big one, man. Like Rothbard is like the king for me. And Anatomy of the State, that's a fantastic book. And I mean, obviously Ayn Rand, I think Ayn Rand is a little cliche, I guess. I'm not an objectivist. And Yaron Brook, he kind of annoys me. Like the Rand Institute, like I'm not really vibing with that side of libertarianism, but I'm not going to try to denigrate Rand's contributions. I mean, they were substantial. She was a solid thinker, but I think Rothbard is fantastic. That's a really good place to start. Walter Block is another really good author that I love. There's a whole bunch of them, but really, Rothbard for me just stands at the top. I mean, the fact that he also was an economic thinker as well. He was on both sides, and I'm also an economics dork. I'm a hard money guy, right? Like, yeah. I'm almost cringing a little bit because I'm kind of a cliche. Like I'm just kind of like the standard, I don't like labels, but I'm like a standard ANCAP hard money kind of dude. Like, and so I wish I had something like really out of left field that, hey, no one's ever heard of this guy before. Like, no, I'm like pretty standard, man.
Yeah, I mean, but it's almost impossible to beat Rothbard because his work is just so clear and consistent, and that's one of the beauties of libertarianism is that it doesn't necessarily it gives us a fundamental starting point without giving us a pre-described destination. And I think that a lot of political philosophies, they actually begin with the end in mind and work backwards from that. Whereas libertarianism just kind of has this starting point and says, well, we're not really sure what the future holds, but this has to be kind of the central goal. And I think Rothbard was just so clear and consistent in his work. And that's one of the reasons why he's been so powerful. And I agree. Like the first time that I came across Rothbard and I saw this consistency, I was like, man, it just makes sense. Like, I don't understand how someone can read this and not just be like, okay, you start with the non-aggression principle and build up from that. I just don't see any other way to view the world, you know?
Yeah, I'm the same way. And I guess somebody else that maybe is a little more obscure is David Friedman. So I like David Friedman because he, like Bob Murphy, delivered a lot of like, okay, give me some practical solutions. Like, how might we, how might a stateless society work? I think they did some great work on that. It's, not convincing to a lot of people because a lot of people want, communist style central planning. I want to know exactly how it's going to work. And it's like, it's deeply unsatisfying to people to say, look, we cannot understand the collective brilliance of the free market. Like we can't, look into the future and say, like for example, if you were in, 1980, you couldn't have seen the advent of the smartphone. You could not have predicted what the free market is going to produce. And then similarly, like when you talk about policing and courts and a lot of these other alternative, hypotheses about how we might, solve some of these problems in the future, like people don't like that. They want clear. They want, hey, tell me how to solve all the problems tomorrow.
Right.
But ultimately, like I said, I do love David Friedman. He's one of the first people on the scene to really give what I think is a compelling vision for how, a stateless society might function. Like I said, shout out Bob Murphy. I've had him on the show. He's fantastic. His book Chaos Theory, very, very similar type of, approach to that. Konkin as well. If you're from an agorist standpoint, Konkin is the GOAT. Like I think he put forward some very, very concrete ideas that people are implementing today. They've been fantastic. We've got 3D printed guns now. We have cryptocurrency. Right. So I guess a lot of it for me is, it's like, duh, okay, I get the non-aggression principle. Yeah, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. Okay, then now what? And for me, it's like, that's where the interesting part is. And I don't think it's political action. I don't think it's, campaigning for the LP, trying to become president, trying to take over. That's not where I'm at. I think we have to do something practical, and ultimately we need to change some people's minds if society is going to move. I think politics is downstream from culture, and unless we paint a compelling vision and we can convince people that hey, we shouldn't hurt people and we shouldn't steal their stuff, like we have no chance at all.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your religious background because we touched on that in our conversation last week. And so you were born and raised Catholic. And I just want you to talk to me about that experience. Now, I'm someone, even though like the title of my show is The Protestant Libertarian, I was also born and baptized Catholic when I was younger. Many of my friends are Catholic. I have a lot of respect for my Catholic friends, especially the ones that are very consistent in their practice. So I'm just curious about like what that background was like for you. And then when did you start asking serious questions about your faith?
Yeah, that's a interesting one. So I had very, very, very stringent, Eastern European Catholic upbringing. My grandmother was her mom was an immigrant from Czechoslovakia, and so it's just deeply embedded in that culture. And I had. My grandfather's brother was a bishop of the state of South Dakota for 28 years. In case you don't know the hierarchy, that's like right below cardinal. Yeah. That's very, very high up. This top official for the state. My mom's cousin was a Jesuit, still is a Jesuit, was teaching in the Vatican, like super, super, super Catholic. I can't emphasize how much. And so that's where I got my introduction to my religious training, and I went to, a Catholic school, like I mentioned, and did the catechism thing, and I studied everything, and I was an altar boy. I was like, did all the things. And like I said, I was very uncritical about it. I just accepted. When you're in a group, oftentimes you don't think. It's like, well, these guys have it all figured out. I'm going to go along to get along. I believed a bunch of crazy stuff and didn't think about it until I think I was in my second. I mentioned it took me 13 years to graduate high school. My second senior year, I moved to Montana. I lived with my uncle, who was Protestant. And one of my girlfriends was, I think, Baptist or something, and for the first time sort of presented the Protestant view, right? The sola scriptura and some of these other alternate views to Catholicism, and made a compelling case. And I changed over to I was Protestant for quite a while, actually, until my adulthood. Like I was in my 30s, I think, before I became atheist. And so, yeah, it was just a matter of, believing a lot of things, because I think the Christian story got deep in, like, just down to the bone. There's something about it when you're raised as a child, like the things that you're taught by your parents, they get hold of you somehow. And that sort of really stuck with me for a long time, and I couldn't shake it. But there were some contradictions, right? So that I started studying philosophy, I started studying science, and I came from a fundamentalist background, where we're not only Catholic, like I said, believing things like this wine actually turns into the blood of Jesus, like really wild stuff. The Protestants have their own thing, particularly on the fundamentalist side. Well, like, Earth is created in 6 literal days, and, like just the really ridiculous stuff. And that's what sort of got me to a point where I had to, like, this is not actually true, right? And so if this isn't actually true, then what can I actually believe? And then I sort of fell into the new atheist world, and they had some very compelling arguments, and clearly a bunch of stuff isn't true. And I took a very unsophisticated view, and I walked away from that pretty jaded, honestly. And that's where I had a difficult time with my philosophical training and my religious beliefs. Like they sort of clashed, and it took a long time to sort of disentangle some of that stuff. And it was very painful at the time. And I remember slowly sliding into atheism, and I didn't want to. And finally, one of these days, I was just like, I don't believe in God anymore. Like, I had no personal connection. There was nothing, like, it didn't resonate at all for me. It was just something that I realized that I just did because that's how I was raised. And it sort of infected me like a mind virus. And I just went through the motions, and I just, like, I don't believe this. This isn't true. And I just walked away from it, and I became pretty bitter Reddit atheist for a while, to my great shame now, because I think we talked in our show, like, I see a ton of value in Christianity for shaping the Western civilization. Enlightenment values are super, super important. And I hold it in high regard, but I'm still in that place where I don't think it's necessarily true, unless it's in like a Jordan Peterson type of squishy, like, true. Like, what do you mean by true?
Yeah, no, I totally understand where you're coming from there. And I have to say too, as like, I remember that there was a time, and this was probably about 10 years ago, where I really wanted to understand the new atheist movement as well. And I had come in contact with some of these writers and everything like that. And they are really good at knocking down fundamentalists. Like, they're amazing at that. And I was also too on the fence about theistic evolution, just with the way that I read Genesis and everything like that. I was, it seems like it makes a lot of sense. And I remember listening to some of these lectures by Richard Dawkins, where he wasn't talking about religion at all. He was just talking about the theory of evolution. And I was like, well, that actually makes a lot of sense in the way that he's presenting it. And I don't think that there are very many people that give those ideas a fair shake. But I do know that, and this is one of the things we discussed last week too, is that there are a lot of Christians, especially if you're in like a fundamentalist or a very traditionalist home, where to even ask the question is considered a sin. And so that automatically cuts you off from being able to have any sort of engagement with alternative ideas. And I'm wondering, like, when you moved out of Catholicism, being from a very traditional Catholic family, into Protestantism, and then when you moved from Protestantism into kind of agnostic atheism, how did the people in your previous camp treat you? Like, how did your Catholic family handle you transitioning to Protestantism? And then, like, how did your Protestant, like, friends and relationships, how did they handle the fact that you were sliding out of that?
That's a great question. So I definitely had a big pushback from my grandmother, right? So when I moved to Montana, like I mentioned, lived with my aunt and uncle, she apparently didn't say anything at the time, but she was very concerned because they had left the flock, and I saw them become a little bit of a pariah in our family. And when I told my grandmother, she was heartbroken, and she's like, "This is exactly what I thought was going to happen. I never should have let you move out there." It was that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Very, very disappointed. And so that wasn't a whole lot of fun. And obviously my mother as well. But I've got a whole other story. I don't know if you know this, but I was, dealt with severe child abuse. And so my stepdad really abused me for a whole lot of years, and that's overlaid on top of it. And so it is a pretty messy thing. But I've actually cut ties with my mother. I don't talk to her at all. She's that's a very a long rabbit hole to get down. But she at the time was very disappointed. And everybody in my family just was kind of like this ambient disappointment with me at family functions and stuff, because I wasn't part of the tribe anymore. And so, yeah, that was, that was a rough time. But ultimately, like, I didn't live with anywhere near any of my family. Like my wife and I, we were, completely separate from her family and from my family. We were, raising our kids up in Seattle. And so we were pretty disconnected physically from it. And so some of that provided some insulation. Just the distance, right? Geography.
Right. Yeah, but it has to be a really big challenge when people, and this is one of the things that I think is so frustrating to me about the way that Christians handle people asking questions and even moving out of their faith, is that like our love for other people is supposed to be unconditional. And if somebody starts asking questions and comes to conclusions that we don't approve of, that shouldn't change the way that we love them. But like in a lot of ways, it really does. It's almost like, okay, if you don't accept all of our beliefs, then you just like, we can't be friends with you anymore. And I find that to be not only extremely disingenuous from a Christian standpoint and counterproductive, but also it just like, it doesn't like, what good does it do? You know what I'm saying? Like, what good does it do to cut people off just because they're asking questions that you might not be comfortable with asking?
Yeah. And the Protestants were the worst about this in my life.
Yeah,
right? I had friends, and they were like, oh, we're going to disfellowship you. Is that what they call it? They just like, we're not going to, we're going to shun you. We're not allowed to talk to you anymore because you have decided that you don't believe this anymore, which is very strange. So I think that even though the Catholics, they're like the ones in my family, the ones who really cared, like they were super crushed by it. They still talk to me. Like they didn't like, disinherit me or, cut me out of the family. Like they were just, we're disappointed in you. Were the Protestants in my life, I think they were very strict about, nope, I can't talk to you anymore. You're cut off. Like you were a believer. Now you're not a believer. So you're dead to me. Like that was generally the way it went.
Yeah, there's definitely an arrogance built into American Protestantism. And I think the irony with that is that Protestants are all about evangelism. They're all about going out and trying to bring people in, and they will build relationships and they will give money. They'll do whatever it takes to bring somebody in. But when it looks like somebody's trying to leave, well, it's like, well, we're just going to cut you off and you're done. And it's just like such a double standard. It's an obvious double standard too.
Well, I don't know, because it's like they quoted all this scripture, right? There's this whole process by which you disfellowship somebody. I don't know if that's the right word I'm using. It's been so long since I've been in this world, but like, what I'm saying, when they cut you off, and they went through all that. They showed me, here's the scripture, and then they came to me and it's like, we're going to do this unless you repent. And I'm just like, sorry, like I just don't believe, guys. And then it's like, all right, we're out of here. Like that was kind of the process, and it was very strict too. Like they were just like, we're done.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why I was very fortunate that I was raised in like it was definitely a conservative Lutheran church, but the like conservative Lutheran church was not like fundamentalist in any way. So I never really, and I had friends growing up who were a part of fundamentalist churches, and I was always able to kind of look at it from the outside and be like, whoa, that is not what I'm experiencing in my church too. And so I think that makes it a little bit easier for me to distance myself from that. But I know that for people that are in those fundamentalist movements that have a very particular reading of the Bible, it's kind of hard to kind of break out of that mentality. They just don't have any other way of I guess rationalizing what's happening other than that us versus them kind of paradigm. And I think that really sucks, honestly.
Yeah, it does. But ultimately, like I said, I was, pretty insulated from that stuff. I was an only child. Right. And I was used to like being abused, and sort of like I didn't have a whole lot of friends and family anyway. So it didn't hurt maybe as much as somebody who had like really tight social circles. I could see how that could be a little bit more insidious and a little bit more painful for somebody that's got really strong family bonds. And they decide they want to step out. It almost strikes me to like Scientology a little bit. I think Scientologists do the similar type of move.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Well, there's another thing that I wanted to ask you about because I have literally no experience whatsoever in this area at all, and that's we were talking about your use of psychedelics last week and
Mm.
just how that's kind of changed the way that you've perceived the world. And like I told you on your show, and I don't know if I've ever actually said this on my show before, but the extent of my drug use is that, and I'm not ashamed of this at all because I do think there's some good medical reason for this, but I do have like a stash of edibles, and once or twice a week I will use one of those, a very small amount before going to bed, because it seems like it helps. Like I exercise a lot. It seems like it helps with inflammation, and I always get a great night's sleep when I have it. And I think that there's just so much potential in that's unexplored because people are afraid of it and they'd rather just take these hard drugs because we've kind of morally legitimized drugs that are prescribed by people in white coats, but not ones that you can grow in a pot in your backyard.
Mm.
So the whole thing's like crazy about that. But I wanted to kind of get your perspective on psychedelics and just how that kind of has altered your state of mind. And I know that in that experience, you were kind of maybe open to the idea of there being some sort of transcendence. We won't even call it a being, but just that there might be something bigger out there. So maybe just talk about that entire experience and how it's shaped the way that you view the world.
Yeah, so let me give some background. So I have never been a drug guy either. First time I did any sort of drug at all, I was in my mid 30s, and I was in my suburban home that I owned with my wife when I was like 35 or something. Like this is
Just like me,
relatively new. But I also, like I said, referenced the trauma history, like a severe trauma. I was raped when I was 8 years old by a babysitter, and I was abused daily by my stepdad. Like it was severe stuff, and it left some pretty deep marks, right? And really caused some psychological issues. Really struggled with a lot of things in my life. And so we went to therapy when I was in my 40s. And the guy was huge into meditation, and he sort of looked at me in the counseling session. He was like, you might want to check out the research that's being done by Johns Hopkins University on psilocybin. And he kind of did that thing where he was kind of like saying, like, I can't professionally recommend this to you, but you might want to consider it. And so, being the ADD kid, I went down the rabbit hole and I looked at the research, and I was like, wow, this is fantastic. This is really compelling. And so, went out and I actually grew my own. Went on the internet, figured out how to, you could actually order spores. They're legal. You can buy psilocybin spores online. There's no problem as long as you don't grow them. I'm not recommending anybody do this. It's not advice. But I actually went in and I grew them and, consumed it. I thought it was safer. I'm like one of those people like feels like an ABC after school special buying drugs or something. Right. Weird.
Yeah.
So like, all right, I'm going to grow it myself. I want to know where it came from. I know that it's pure and it's all good. And so, I did it. And I did like, the first one was like 3.5 grams, which is a medium sized dose. It's not massive. And after that one, it was just like, I can never look at the world the same way. It was, it connects you with something transcendent. And that's a great way to put it. I don't know, call it God or the universe, or there's some cosmic curtain opens up and you're let in on this big secret. And it's completely changed the way I look at things and has opened my mind to possibilities. It's definitely gotten rid of my sort of Reddit atheist phase. Like instantly overnight, that was gone. I was very, very hardcore, very injured by religion. Just like to get into arguments with people and talk a bunch of shit. And like literally overnight, that went away. It was like, oh, I don't know anything. And it's so humbling. It's really, really a humbling experience. And it definitely opens you up to possibilities. But you definitely know that whatever you believed before, that's wrong. And so it sort of puts you in this state of being openness. And that's where I'm at. That's one of the reasons I love doing the podcast, because I'm curious. I'm open. I don't want to fight with people about it. I just want a perspective. Like give me your perspective. I want to know what all of this means, because it's definitely weirder than I can imagine. That direct encounter was so different from my experiences with religion, because in those experiences, there wasn't any experience, right? Like, sometimes, you get like somebody would have a story and make you tear up a little bit or make you feel a type of way, like a little bit, but it was no more than going to a movie. Psychedelics is a crash course. Like it's like head-on collision with the transcendent, and you are just immediately in awe. It is such a difficult experience to describe, but it definitely, like I said, brought me so low to the point where you're like, I am infinitesimally small, and you're in the presence of something absolutely. I mean, very much it was like the Bible stories, and I think that there's definitely something to all the ancient religions. I I think there's psychedelics at the base. Honestly, I think that is a type of experience that I used to read about, like God encountering Moses. It's just just or some of these other it might even be angelic encounters where people like fall on their face. It's that powerful. It is just like mind blowing. It's mind bending, and you can't put it into words. Like I always use that analogy of like dropping a caveman in Times Square for 15 minutes, and then taking him back and telling him to explain to his buddies what just happened to him. You run out of language. It's completely ineffable.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm going to ask you to do something that's a little bit difficult right now then too. But can you just describe when you're on it, like what does it feel like? What do you experience in the moment? Because I know I have a ton of respect for people that choose not to drink because drinking is really bad for your health. But I was just raised in an environment where I love whiskey and I can't get over that. And so people know what it's like to have like a couple of drinks and feel the buzz from that. But when you're on psychedelics, like are you like conscious? Do you feel like you're floating? What's the actual physiological experience like of being on it?
It depends, because there's different dimensions of the experience. It's a really rich experience. It's a full body, right? There's a body feel that comes with it for sure. There's your thought patterns definitely change. Like you get different. I know I've seen the science on this. Different parts of your brain that aren't used to communicating suddenly communicate with each other. And so that's weird. So you think very differently, and then you see things, right? So if you look at a textured wall, for example, or even something in nature, you see things start to move. You always, you've probably seen the cartoonish depictions in movies of people that are tripping. It doesn't look anything like that. I always laugh at that, but things definitely move. Wood grain patterns, like anything that has a pattern, it'll physically, you'll observe it moving. If you close your eyes, so that's where the magic happens. That's why I really like to, recommend people put eye shades on, put on some music, and your entire landscape of mind changes. You'll see fractal patterns. Like there's a whole bunch of things that are going on in, behind your eyeballs. And you feel like you're connected to the entire universe. Oftentimes you've heard of an ego death before. That's where you sort of stop recognizing yourself as a separate entity, and you're sort of part of everything. And it's very difficult to describe, but that's a persistent feeling. And that's one of the reasons I've been, more partial towards like a panpsychist view of the universe, like where the universe is like just one thing. And there's like a universal consciousness, and we're all sort of pinpoints. We're individual sort of like mini consciousnesses where the universe is sort of perceiving itself through us, if that makes sense. Like Carl Sagan has a very famous quote. I probably butchered it, but that's the essence of it, that everything that's conscious is just the universe itself perceiving itself. And that's what it feels like. It definitely feels like we're all connected. I think it brings you closer to humanity, right? I think you have a lot more empathy for people, a lot more love, and I think it's a very powerful thing. But boy, it's so difficult to describe. And there's also so many different ways you can do it. Like I mentioned, the eye shades are one. I actually like to go out in nature. Like I'll wait till the peak starts and I'll go walk out in the forest. Encountering nature, it completely transforms what everything looks like. You'll never look at a tree the same way. You'll never look at a colony of ants in the forest the same way. Like it is very, very life-changing, but it's in a way that it sounds pedantic the way I'm describing it. It sounds mundane, the things that I'm talking about. But if you're in the experience, it's similar to, like, you look at a tree, it'd be very similar to going to like the Las Vegas Sphere, if you've ever been to a place like that, where it's just this mind-blowing thing that's going on. But it's stuff that's, very, very mundane. It's just, the natural world. It's just, you're floored by the beauty that's all around you. It is. I'm doing such a terrible job describing it. I knew I would. But that's what it feels like, man. Like you're completely in awe. That's the best word I can describe it. Just awestruck, just by the experience and by nature itself, and being sort of let in on this cosmic secret. The visuals are cool. Like it completely changes the way things look, and it's very interesting for sure. If you're a person that's just likes to be stimulated and you want to see a bunch of crazy stuff, like cool, like that's certainly a thing. But it's just, everything is so beautiful, and you just are left in awe. Like kind of the way I would hear, it's very religious in nature. That's why I guess maybe why I keep poking at this, because it feels like a religious experience. You're just in awe of God's creation, if God exists. Like it's just mind bending. How much gratitude you have to be alive and to experience everything. Everything that's mundane feels very, very important and very special. And you just leave the experience. It takes months for you to sort of, to compartmentalize all the things that happen on a very high dose experience. It's very difficult to sort of incorporate all those things. You learn a bunch of lessons. You have like these thoughts that pop up, like I mentioned, things that you might not even see the pattern in your waking consciousness, but immediately it's obvious. You're like, oh, I'm doing this thing. It's really causing me a lot of problems in my life, and I'm doing it because of this. And then you can just stop tomorrow. Like it's just gives you insights. It is very, very incredible. All the different dimensions of this, but it is definitely life-changing, and it's definitely scary. I think that's a word that people should hear from me as well, because they might be hearing it as like I'm saying, hey, everybody go out and do this, but it's actually quite terrifying because of the direct encounter with the transcendent. I think if you are like I was, reading religious stories, kind of saying I believe it, not really feeling anything, and then you all automatically just get pulled into the space and to where you're confronted with it, like then you're really left with like, oh, this isn't bullshit. Like there's something going on here, and I don't know what this is, and it's so powerful, and it's just like this. In some ways, it's very terrifying. So sorry for the long ramble, man. Like I'm trying to encapsulate this absolutely ineffable experience, and it's difficult to do.
Well, I know we got about 10 minutes left, and that's actually the perfect transition to the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about today. One of my really good friends is Christian too, and everything like that. He was kind of in the same position that you were with the psilocybin, where he did a lot of research on it, and he's kind of skeptical of big pharma and kind of skeptical of all of the synthetic drugs, and he's like very, very much in shape. And he looked at some of this research on this and started growing it himself as well. Now he microdoses. But he said that has just completely helped, like with his mood and a lot of his like stress and anxiety. That has just really helped him deal with that. And there seems to be a lot of research out there that suggests that it does have very powerful effects that like synthetic drugs just can't replicate. So I know that on top of kind of this aspect of your journey over the last year or so, and because you posted about this on Twitter, you've kind of been going through this health revolution on your own, where you're just trying to like get in shape and lose weight. And you've made some incredible progress towards that. And you've had some people on your show that have talked about the need for holistic health. And this is something that I'm really passionate about too. Like I'm very, very, very much concerned about like the food that I put in my body, exercise, and all of those kind of things. So just talk to me a little bit about your health journey, how maybe like the psilocybin fits into that, and just where you want to go with this in the future, because it's pretty incredible the transformation that you've had over the last year.
Yeah, so psilocybin is not a huge part of my journey right now. Like I do microdose it now and then. It's not every single day, but it's frequent enough, and it helps with my ADHD symptoms mostly. It's kind of like it's like a squeegee for my brain, get the brain fog out. Other people, like you mentioned, that have mental health issues like depression or anxiety, it's very, very helpful for that. For those nerds out there, it actually acts on the 5-HT2A agonist, 5-HT2A receptor. It's a 5-HT2A agonist. It works very similar as SSRIs do. Because the psilocybin molecule almost is exactly like a serotonin molecule, and actually binds to serotonin receptors. And that's why you get the effect, because it actually plugs into the serotonin receptors. And so it allows for more of that free serotonin that you have floating in your synapses, but it doesn't have the inhibition properties of SSRIs, because it basically the way your neuron works is one will spit out some serotonin and the other will receive it on the other end, and then it'll suck it back up like a vacuum, right? So the reuptake, that vacuuming of it back from the synapse, that's what mechanically gets disrupted with SSRIs. And so basically it still allows for more free serotonin with psilocybin, but doesn't mess with the reuptake mechanism. So all of the side effects that you get with SSRIs just aren't there with psilocybin. So that's a long preamble to the health journey, which is, a lot of it has been mediated by my carnivore journey, right? So I started, I had to figure out, I put on a bunch of weight. I was like 290 pounds. I'm like, what am I going to do? And I saw carnivore January in the calendar, and I said, why not? Let's start there. And so the first month I lost like 34 pounds. Just eating meat, and that was fantastic. And now I'm down about 75 pounds. And I've been sticking to a carnivore-ish diet, very much, protein heavy, a lot of, chuck roast. I eat a ton of chuck roast, man. It's it's like $6 a pound. It's basically like ribeye. The macros are great. And I'm like intermittent fasting. So I'm like doing one meal a day, maybe two. So I've been shrinking the feeding window. And I don't really do a whole lot of supplementation. Creatine, I'm doing like 20 grams of creatine a day. I do a really high quality fish oil supplement and magnesium, like a magnesium glycinate. And then for me, I don't do the weed. I do the glycine for sleep. You tried glycine tea before?
No, we have sleepy time tea at night, which is kind of like a chamomile kind of thing, which is good. But no, I've never had the glycine before.
Boy, do you know Zach Strength?
Mm-mm.
Oh man, he's a great follow on Twitter. You should follow him.
Zach Strength.
Zach Strength. He was a D1 football player. I think he was almost NFL level. But anyway, like he has a great Twitter page, and he was recommending glycine tea. And he's like, dude, you're gonna have the craziest dreams, but it helps you sleep really well. And so I bought this bulk glycine off of Amazon. And he's right, man. Well, that thing put you to sleep quick, and you have the craziest dreams. It's wild.
but it does. Like, it knocks you out. You get restful sleep, and
oh yeah. I have a Fitbit, and my sleep metrics have just went off the charts since I started using the glycine. It's fantastic, because I used to do like you did, the little puff or two before bed. But for me, it messed with my REM sleep. Cannabis really doesn't, treat my REM sleep very well, and I have difficulty, getting enough REM sleep anyway. So, the glycine has been fantastic. I haven't taken cannabis for like 2 years now.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So what's your ultimate goal in all of this? Do you have a health destination that you're trying to get to, or do you just want to overall live a higher quality life?
Yeah, no, I don't anymore. I was really indexed on the weight, and I realized that's not the right metric. I want to be, functional. And so this year, Jordan Goldstein, I'm not sure if you know who that is, but he invited me out to the Prairie on Fire. So it's in Indianapolis. It's an ultra. It's a backyard ultra. And it's 4-mile loops, basically all day until you can't complete them anymore. And I'd been a runner my entire life, but I hurt my knee. I had some articular knee damage, articular cartilage damage in my left knee. And last marathon I ran was 2019. And that's when I really started putting the weight on, because I used to use running to sort of stay in shape. So I was so focused on the weight because I wanted to get back to running. But ultimately, when I thought about it, it's like, I just want to be functional. I want to do all the things that I want to do. And also be ultimately healthy. And I realized that I was focusing so much on the weight loss that I think I was doing some unhealthy things with respect to like long-term fasting that was like impacting my lean muscle mass. And so I'm like, you know what, I really need to put on a bunch of muscle. I need to make sure my metrics are good. I'm, getting my blood work done and checking for my testosterone level and all these things, my C-reactive protein levels and all my blood markers. I'm trying to focus on being healthy, as opposed to, what the scale says.
Yeah. No, I think that's incredible, man. Well, dude, it's been a lot of fun talking with you tonight. I know we had a little bit of a scheduling mishap, but we wanted to make this work out perfectly. Oh, dude, again, not a problem at all. And my audience knows, I'm terrible with computers and don't know how to send calendar invites, and that would probably be very helpful to the guests that I have on the show. So I'm convicted about making a change in my life now, and I appreciate you helping facilitate that. But before I let you go, just tell my audience where they can find Aiming Up and what they can expect from your show over the next couple of months.
You can find it on all the platforms at Aiming Up Podcast. Sorry, it's not completely updated everywhere. I've been really trying to get these things out, but primarily I'm focused on getting episodes recorded because I'm trying to provide better content. As you know, this is a very difficult skill and it requires a ton of effort. So at Aiming Up Podcast everywhere. And what's coming up, I don't know. I've had a couple of great big guests this year. I had Zuby on. I've had Lawrence Krauss, who's fantastic. And so I'm just trying to book, bigger and bigger guests and talk about more interesting topics, man. So I would just say, be on the lookout for more diverse topics too. I'm going to try to do less libertarian content, although I keep getting sucked into it, and more stuff on consciousness and sort of like, really weird, esoteric things, man. I want to talk about more interesting stuff with some larger accounts. And where can they follow you on Twitter? Oh, my personal account is at @BGetsBetter. It says it right there on the screen there, or at Aiming Up Podcast on Twitter as well. Perfect. Well, Brent, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Hey, thank you, man. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com.
You can also find me on Twitter. You can follow me at the handle @ProLibertyPod. Again, that is @ProLibertyPod. And you can also visit me at theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com. At theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com, you can also support the Christians for Liberty Network and the Libertarian Christian Institute. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you next Tuesday.